well, I want to tell the story from Benin, and it's a variant of the Persephone tale. It's the story, one of the first stories I translated really from one of my mother tongues into English, and it's in my first book of stories, Why Goes Smell Bad. And that story was the scariest I had ever heard as a child. Because it's about death, you see. But in the original, it was really fun. You know, there was no possibility of the little one returning. But in my adaptation of it, you know, she was allowed to come back for part of the year and spend time with her mom. So that's the difference. Anyway, if I say story time, you say story time. Story time. Story time. If I say my story takes flight over countries and kingdoms of long ago, you say of long ago. So she's telling the little one, look, I told you, but you wouldn't listen. And look what happened. Anyway, say to me please, the interview with God. The interview with God.
Interview with God.
I had a dream that I interviewed God. So you want to interview me, God said? If you have the time, I said. God smiled. My time is eternity, he said. So what do you have in mind to ask me? And I said, what surprises you the most about humankind? And God said, that they get bored with childhood. They rush to grow up, and they long to be children again. That by focusing so anxiously for the future, they forget all about the present, so that in the end, they live in neither the present nor the future. That they lose their health to make money, and then lose their money to restore their health. That they live as if they will never die, and they die as though they had never lived. God's hand took mine, and we were silent a while. Then I said, as a parent, what life lessons do you want your children to learn? And God said that they cannot make anyone love them. All they can do is let themselves be loved. But it's not good to compare oneself to others. They must learn forgiveness by practicing forgiveness. That two people can look at the same thing and see it differently. That there are many people who love them dearly, but who just don't know how to show or express it. That it takes just a few moments to open profound wounds in those they love. And it may take many years to heal them. That the richest person is not one who has the most, but one who needs the least. That it's not enough that they forgive one another. They must also forgive themselves. He said, above all, I am here for them always. 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 Story time.
Story time.
My story takes flight over countries and kingdoms of long ago. It's of long ago. The light on a little girl called Agosi and her widowed mother, Agosino. Agosi was a beautiful little girl. She had jet black, abundant hair. She has a dimple that made her smile the most beautiful smile on the face of the earth. And Agosino loved her daughter above all else. But at the same time, she was her despair. Because whatever Agosi saw would set words rolling off her tongue. And there was nothing her mother could do about it. If you see a tree with roots where leaves should have been, or if you see a fish planted black, yellow, red and green, hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen the Spirit. If you see a man with his eyes at the back of his head, or a pregnant woman carrying the little one in her neck, hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen the Spirit. If you see a newborn with full-grown teeth like a man, or you see a man with 1,001 toes instead of 10, hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen the Spirit. But Agostino's warning was a wasted breath, because her daughter simply wouldn't listen. And whatever she saw would set words rolling off her tongue. Story time.
Story time.
One day, Agosi saw her mother preparing for a journey. And she said, "Oh, Mother, I want to go with you." And Agosi said, "No, my daughter, stay home. For I fear this may be for you a journey of no return. Because this is a journey with many strange sights along the way to tempt the talkative to their death. Stay home, child, and I shall come back very soon." "No, Mom, I want to go with you, and I promise not to say a word, however strange the sights I may see along the way." "No, my daughter, please, stay home. Stay home, because I fear this journey may be a journey of no return for you." But of course, Agosi wouldn't take no for an answer. And she broke down and wept, and tears flowed down her cheeks. And the sight of her daughter's beautiful face flowing with tears pained Agostino beyond endurance. So she said, "Okay, I will take you with me. But you have to promise not to say a word, even if you see a man with a head growing beneath his shoulder." "But Mom, I promise not to say a word, even if I see a man with 3 heads growing beneath his shoulders." so it was that mother and daughter set out on the long journey, with many strange sights along the way to tempt the talkative to their deaths. They walked and walked and walked until all familiar sights and sounds faded away, and yet they kept walking. They walked until not a breath of wind stirred the green grass, and the trees stood gaunt and motionless. And yet, they kept walking. And as the sun stood high in the sky, they came to the edge of a field where a flea was still in the soil, wielding a gigantic hoe. Because he opened her eyes wide. Oh, Mom! What a strange sight is this? A flea wielding a gigantic hoe? Oh! Who has had so much strength in those tiny little arms? But no sooner had the gossip spoken than she turned into a flea before her mother's very eyes. And her mother went numb all over, and clasping her hand to her head, she broke into lamentation, singing, crying, and begging the spirit to have mercy. Agosi ko iege, nkabenu weje, amohumbo mano, jehili hili lewen, amohumbo mano, jehili hili lewen, amohumbo mano, jehili hili lewen, amohumbo mano. Agosi, my daughter, I gave you warning, but it didn't get through to you. Look what you've got yourself into. If you see a flea tilling the soil wielding a big hoe, hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen a spirit. Agostino wept so bitterly and sang so movingly that the spirit had mercy and restored her daughter to her. And soon, Agostino and her daughter resumed their journey. They walked and walked and walked until the sun started to go down over the horizon. And yet they went on walking. And at the bend in the road, they came into view a river of milk flowing backward. Agosi tried to keep her lips still, but in the end the words came spilling out. Oh, Mom, this is a very strange sight indeed. A river of milk flowing backward? Oh, my friend will think I've gone mad if I ever tell them this. And no sooner had Agosi spoken than a crocodile came out of the depth of the river and dragged her beneath the milky waves. Once again, Agostino broke into lamentation and dropped to her knees, clasping her hand to her head, singing, weeping, and begging the spirit to have mercy. Agosi ko iege, nkabenu weje, amohumbu mano, Jahili hili lewen amumaro tode sarubu sago amumaro. Agosi, my daughter, I gave you warning, but my words never got through to you. Look what trouble you got yourself into. If you see a flea tilling the soil within a hole, hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen a spirit. If you see a river of milk flowing backward, hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen a spirit. Because, sang so movingly and wept so bitterly that the spirit took pity on her and restored her daughter to her. Soon, mother and daughter resumed their journey. A long journey with many strange sights along the way to tempt the talkative to their deaths. They walked and walked until the sun all but vanished over the horizon, touching the heavens with fire. And yet, they kept walking. And all of a sudden, at the bend in the road, they came upon a very strange sight. A skeleton holding his skull in one hand and scooping up water from a calabash with the other. It was death taking a shower. Agosi clasped her hands to her mouth, her eyes growing wider and wider and wider. But in the end, she couldn't keep the words in. Oh, Mom! This is a very strange sight indeed. I've seen a flea tilling the soil within a big hole in it, and I saw a river of milk flowing backward. I thought those were strange sights. But this beats them all! This beats them all! A skeleton holding his head, his head in one, his skull in one hand, and scooping up water from the calabash with the other. Oh, my friend will say I'm mad. They'll say I've gone mad if I ever tell them about this. No sooner has she spoken than death took aim with his skull and struck Agosi dead. Once again, Agosi will clasp her hands over her head, singing, weeping, begging death to have mercy. Agosi, 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 go again. Nkagenu ete, amumaro, jahili hili lewe, amumaro, lore sarubu sago, amumaro, uneo uno ume, amumaro. Agosi, my daughter, I gave you warning, but my word didn't get through. Look what trouble you got yourself into. If you see a flea tilling the soil within a big hole, hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen a spirit. If you see a river of milk flowing backward, hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen a spirit. If you see a skeleton holding his skull in one hand and scooping up water from a calabash with the other. Hold your tongue, child, for you may have seen death. But death didn't pay any attention. He turned away. But Agostino wouldn't give up. She rolled in the dust, begging, pleading, singing, but death wouldn't listen. But Agostino wouldn't give up. She tore her shirt to shreds. She tore out her hair at the roots, pleading, singing, begging death to have mercy. In the end, death was indeed touched with pity, and he spoke with a dry skeletal voice that sent shivers down Agostino's spine. Agostino, wipe your tears and listen. For I have good tidings for you. Never have I seen one human being cry so bitterly and sing so movingly for the sake of another. So, instead of taking your daughter away and keeping her to myself forever and evermore, I shall allow her to come and spend half a year with you, on condition your daughter reveals none of the secrets of the country of the dead. And when she comes to visit, never try to keep her beyond her time. For if you do, there shall be trouble. As death spoke, the earth shook, and lightning crisscrossed the sky. Death vanished from sight, taking Agostino with him. But death was as good as his word. But 6 months later, he allowed Agostino to come and visit. And so it was that Agostino found herself dividing her time between the country of the living and the country of the dead. And while she was in the country of the dead, her mother wouldn't stop crying to ease her pain. She took to tilling the soil and planting different crops. Whenever she cried, it would rain. Rain would come pouring down from heaven. Sometimes she would remember a particular song that she and her mother used to sing. And whenever she did, she would cry harder than ever. And whenever she did, it would rain harder than ever. And rivers would burst their banks, and water would cover the whole village. But when it came time for her daughter to visit, Agostino would gather in the yield of her farm. And she would put on her best clothes and deck herself out with glittering jewels. And they'll be dancing and singing and feasting throughout the village. And sometimes Agostino would find her daughter's visit such a delight that she would try to hold on to her beyond the time that death had allotted to her. And whenever she did, the sun would blaze fiercely in the heaven, and the leaves and the grass would wither and die. And throughout her visit, her mother, her playmates, their neighbors, the whole village would keep asking her, Agosi, could you please tell us what are things like in the country of the dead? And Agosi would shake her head, and smiling gently she would say, that I may not tell you, for it must remain a secret. And they would gasp, and they would cry out in wonder, because the impossible had come to pass. Agosi had learned to hold her tongue at long last. And that is why, to this day, nobody knows for sure what happens to human beings when they pass out of this world into the great beyond. And that was the story. As I was telling you before, of all the stories I heard in the years of childhood, the story of the girl who brought the story of the girl who could not hold her tongue and was taken away from her mother by death was the one that haunted me the most. Like no other story, it struck terror into my heart. Perhaps because I was once a child with a penchant for speaking out of turn, though fortunately not with such tragic consequences as Agosi and her mother had to endure. And just as Agosi learned to hold her tongue at last, I too changed and came to embrace the virtue of circumspection as I grew from childhood into my teens. You see, change is the only constant in life. An idea the great American poet Robert Frost expresses with splendid eloquence in one of his best-loved poems, "Nothing gold can stay. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold, her early leaf a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subside to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day. Nothing gold can stay." There is much, much more to the story I have just shared with you than the idea of the necessity, nay, the inevitability of change, however. The metaphor of grief, recovery, and progress threaded through the story seems to me most relevant to our own individual and collective experiences during the pandemic and in its aftermath. And the pandemic itself, in all its horror and its awesome power to kill and disable, is a reminder to us all of our need of each other and the necessity of shaking off our smug indifference amid the simple beauties of the earth, our callous tendency to take for granted the multitudinous blessings bestowed upon us. It is a wake-up call to us all to live from the inside out, to embrace our inner selves and express them authentically to the world. The COVID-19 pandemic, which overwhelmed the world over a year ago and upended life as we knew it, had brought its fair share of grief, anguish, and despair as it forced us into lockdown, took the lives of loved ones, threatened our own, separated us from things we had taken for granted, and quickened our awareness of the brevity and fragility of life. Never did the tragic truth of the words of Scripture ring more true than at the dark hour of the soul. Man that is born of woman has but a short time to live and is full of misery. He comes forth and is cut down like a flower. Much like the grief-stricken mother who sang songs, tilled the soil, and planted crops as a way of coping with the ordeal of separation, we struggle to find ways of alleviating the weight of sorrow and fear and frustration and loneliness pressing down upon us. But even as people grieved and struggled under the stresses and strains of lockdown, many, especially research scientists, doctors, health workers, and first responders were moved to heroic acts of courage and self-sacrifice, laboring around the clock in the search for cures and vaccines, saving lives, providing a measure of dignity and comfort for the dying, assuaging as best they could the pain and sorrow of grieving relatives. And now the worst of the pandemic is behind us. Lockdown is all but a memory, and life is slowly returning to a semblance of normality. We must count our blessings and give thanks for the enormous progress that has been made in so short a space of time in the fight against COVID-19 and the elaboration of vaccines to protect humankind against it. Above all, we must make the most of our emergence from lockdown and the promise of recovery from the pandemic as a wake-up call to live from the inside out. We must commit ourselves to understanding and knowing ourselves internally and expressing our inner selves authentically to the world. The human lifespan is indeed short and full of misery. And we come forth and are cut down like a flower. Though our lifespan is short, however, we are, all of us, called to make the most of the gift we have been given before our time is up. To paraphrase Father Leo Clifford in one of his sermons, coming into the world, we are all given a shapeless mass, a bag of tools, and a set of rules. And each of us must build something before time has flown. There is no greater misery, no greater tragedy than to reach the end of one's life without having done anything with a shapeless mass, the bag of tools, and the set of rules one had been given. Find what it is you have a passion for and go for it. Only then will you be living from the inside out. And remember Khalil Gibran's teaching as you embrace your passion. He who works in marble is no nobler than he who plows the soil. Nor is he who seizes the rainbow to lay it on a cloth in the likeness of man greater than he who makes the sandals for our feet. Understanding and knowing yourself internally and expressing your inner self authentically to the world is the best way to let your light shine. To hide your light under a bushel out of ignorance, fear, or false modesty is to become a stranger unto creation and to step out of the human procession on the march towards progress. You cannot go through life with your head bowed down as though you owe the world an apology for being you. Nor can you go through life dancing to the drum beat of conformity. It is through lack of the courage to live life from the inside out that, in the words of Thoreau, the mass of men leads lives of quiet desperation, and many go to their graves with a song still in them. Dare to look deep within yourself so as to understand and know yourself internally and express your inner self authentically to the world. Only then can you add to the world's store of artistic, scientific, and technological or intellectual riches. Like mole in the winds in the willows, dare to answer the call of spring and break out of your hole. And if you should be tempted to retrace your steps, remember Muhammad Ali's immortal words, and I quote, "Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration, it's a dare. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. If my mind can conceive it, and my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it." In closing, let me share with you a favorite poem by Georgia Douglas Johnson, one of the leading architects of the Harlem Renaissance. It captures the message I've been trying to convey through this presentation. Your world is as big as you make it. I know, for I used to abide in the narrowest nest in a corner, my wings pressing close to my side. But I sighted the distant horizon, where the skyline encircled the sea, and I throbbed with a burning desire to travel this immensity. I battered the cordons around me and cradled my wings on the breeze, then soared to the uttermost reaches with rapture, with power, with ease. Do you feel squashed by the dead weight of routine or conformity? trapped in a dead-end relationship, a dead-end major, a dead-end job, or a dead-end life. The challenge is in the moment. The time is now. Dare to live from the inside out. And now I want to play a piece of music from Africa, because in the African oral tradition, especially in the Beninese oral tradition, storytelling is a blending of poetry and music and dance. So I'm going to play a piece of music for a few minutes, and I wonder if some of you can join me so we can dance this presentation to a close. And as you dance, I want you to envision the world as a dance floor. A dance floor where everyone is a champion dancer. If everyone is a champion dancer, no one would hurt another. No one would bump into another. If the world is a dance floor, and all the nations are champion dancers, then China will not bump into Taiwan. Israel will not bump into the Palestinian territories. Russia will not bump into Ukraine, because everybody would be a champion dancer. So can I have a few volunteers? People who like to move? Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you can do this in any way you want. There is no specific order, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You can do it in any way you want. The most important thing is to have fun. Okay? All right.
Acha me de bukuno pa medito, cheo fu e kaibo akpeme, mo kiki e toni bono donto, honsu e pedu bude no helenu, acheton di mawa wiwame. Mau kiki e tani mede kuno pa medi cheo fufu e kaya kibi welido. Oho edo kane mei au asino minuto mai radiko bemano fufu edo aswe edo pedo bemode mai farafu sonu jiwanu lede achasu babo tinda sito achapekeno achalolo yoni me ubekamo manatiko kaleko ikamo manu kanile chepiriso medi Ekana hanche butu ilu bazaku mijuka ke ofue luko suwe sache duwe suafi miyokuti da ikoho lelo kusuwe suwako emimusi uwenu konada so ìgbẹ́gbónú roseli sàgbàgbàdo débọ̀ mẹ́rin pẹ̀tọ́ kẹ́díkà yín sojì ẹ̀bùn